Hey there, TNA fam. We're back here at the Impact Zone podcast, talking more TNA wrestling shenanigans. And today I want to talk about how you can make somebody feel important without the title. So I think this is a thing because it's like one of those things that a lot of people kind of forget about or whatever. And some people even reminisce incorrectly, what have you, about certain things. But when somebody doesn't have a title, it's not always like the worst thing. And it doesn't mean that they're sitting there doing nothing. The thing that, these people or these characters need to do to feel like they're doing something important, and maybe that doesn't mean that they get the main event every single week or whatever, or even every month. But that they're like, look at The Undertaker, one of the longest tenured wrestlers in WWE. You can look at Ric Flair, another guy that very long tenured in wrestling, just in general, in many different promotions and whatnot. But look at guys like that, Flair's a bit different because he had the title so many times, but there were many points in his career for even long periods of time, even especially during his later WWE run, that he, yes, he held the Intercontinental and the tag titles or whatever, but he never really held the world title again. Yes, I think he challenged for it like a couple of times or whatever it was, but he never felt unimportant, really. He always had something to do. Same with The Undertaker. Even when he wasn't fighting for the title, he had something to do. He had some other feud or some other rivalry to slot into. Like, he did obviously challenge for the title several times during his time, and certainly won it several times during his time at the top. But he went full decades without, winning the belt. So it's like, that's the sort of thing that you've got to think about. How do you keep somebody not just to be in the mix per se, because that's a lot easier saying, oh, well, they might challenge for the title or they might be in contendership. How do you make somebody outside of just contendership and having stories for themselves? They've really got to have a character that sort of lends itself to having stories work around it and having feuds with just about anyone and everyone else that's on that roster. I actually think the JBL style character, I'd say it's more of a Trump style character now, but where it's like, I'm against illegal immigrants or whatever else it is, that sort of thing. Oh, the Zeb Coulter type thing. What was Swagger's name was still Jack Swagger then, I think. But that we the people thing, that's always been a thing, especially in the US. But I think it's like a big gimmick that you could do fairly easily, and it can often form people into these types of stories where it's like, yes, you might start doing sort of a lot of similar things or whatever, where it's like, what's the difference between him wrestling Rey Mysterio versus wrestling, I don't know, Pentagon or whoever, I don't know, or Del Rio or whoever. In terms of wrestling, I guess, Del Rio and I don't think he ever wrestled Penta, but you know what I mean? Just in saying, if he was to wrestle Penta, what would be the difference from him wrestling Rey Mysterio or whatever? You've got to have that level of difference. Why is Rey so different from somebody else? Or why is, if he was going to wrestle some other people, if he was going to wrestle Juventud Guerrero or somebody like that or whatever, or they were just going to bring in some random, luchadors from Mexico or from wherever, or some Japanese stars or whatever else, or anybody from anywhere. If he was going to wrestle a lot of different African folk, it would be like, okay, cool, that's great. What's the difference between somebody one person from Nigeria and another person from Nigeria? That's what I mean. and stylistically wise as well. Like maybe if you say, oh well, we brought what in one heavyweight Nigerian and one lucha style wrestler, but then it's like, well, what's the difference between that Nigerian guy and like the Mexican guy who can do the same stuff? Like, sort of thing. So there's only 2 or 3 different styles of wrestling or whatever, really. I've already talked about this, but Swagger, like if you're talking about Swagger or if you're talking about whoever, they're already taking up one of those slots, and you can kind of have somebody else take up that slot, but they're always going to be in the babyface side of that slot. If they're the foreigner coming in, and this guy is like an asshole right wing dickhead or whatever to them. Like those are the only 2 ever things that you ever see, is either the foreign heel or this poor foreign person like being ridiculed or whatever for coming to the US or whatever. So those are the things that they do. But again, like if you're going to do anything, it doesn't matter what character or what angles you're sort of going for. Eventually you do start falling into doing the same sort of things for the most part. Like, I'm going to fight somebody that has a high-flying style. Well, that's mostly going to be the same for most of the people that have that kind of style. There's not a lot of, yes, they might have a different move here or a different move there, but like for the most part, most of that match, like again, and most of the psychology is going to be the same. They hit their big moves when they hit their big, and in some ways, like again, it's very similar where it's like when you're a heel versing a babyface, they're always going to be hitting the big moves, and you're always going to be trying to take them down and trying to get heat on them and things like that, and trying to, work over body parts and use rest holds and things like that. And cheating and whatnot. So again, what can you do, not just in storyline, because like obviously that's different, but like also just in matches, like there's not a lot that you can really do. And like, yes, you want to shine in these scenarios and whatnot, and you want your opponent to shine, but I think nowadays as well, there's so much expectation that it's very difficult to achieve like getting to that expectation. And I also think that people's expectations of stories and things is like a lot higher. So like these are fairly basic angles for the most part. So like again, trying to tell those stories and trying to not just in ring, but like yes, in ring as well as like on the microphone and through promos and through like actions, like different things like attacking people backstage or what have you, all this sort of stuff or whatnot is what makes people like go, okay, this is the escalation from last week. This is the, what's the next escalation be? Okay, cool. Now he attacked him backstage or whatever. Same thing with matches. It can't just be like, we have a regular match. We have another regular match. Like unless those matches are very far apart for the most part, you can't have regular match, regular match, regular match. You know what I mean? Like you've got to have a regular match. Then you've got to up the ante somewhat, especially if that feud is like already fairly heated. It's like, well, maybe that first match ends in DQ or ends in shenanigans or whatever else it is, and then the next match is like no DQ, but there's still shenanigans because somebody has their second or their manager or whatever else it is, or another team member or faction member or whatever that the babyface wasn't expecting or something like that, or just couldn't defy the odds or whatever else it was, that sort of thing. And then you've got to have another match, like a steel cage match or something like that, so you can be like, well, now they're not going to be a factor or whatever. So that could be the blow off, or it could also be like, well, somehow, some way, or something, the manager or the second or whatever got into the cage or whatever else it was. So at a certain point as well, you've got to know, okay, cool, great, we've got to move on from this story and from these angles. You've got to move to the next thing. You can't just be, I'm going to fight this person for the rest of the year directly. Like, even if you still have beef with them, you're like, at a certain point, they've got to move on. So you've got to move into another program with somebody else. And you might be like, oh, but really, I'm working to get back to this other person or this other thing. But all these things have to be important. You have to get decent mic time, decent match time, decent placement on the card, and things like that. So, the more time and energy in TV and pay-per-view that is dedicated to your feud and your scenarios, the more important, and the higher placement on the card, whatnot, the more people are gonna feel like, okay, cool, this guy isn't just, randomly here, or isn't just a mid-card guy, or isn't just, whatever, they're jobber or whatever. This guy has stories, and this guy is important, and, if he's a legacy, well, somewhat legacy act, like perhaps The Undertaker, he's already been to the dance, he's already a big time, thing that, everyone sort of has something for or whatever. It's not like, oh, okay, this guy who, I don't really want to compare it to just a job guy, but like somebody who has been around, but like it feels like they don't really have plans for, perhaps more so, like they're kind of coming in and coming out more so. But you also want that sort of thing for like your younger guys, your up and coming guys, like Randy Orton. When Undertaker was feuding with Randy Orton, the idea there is to try to get Randy Orton somewhat over, but you can't overshadow the Undertaker. The Undertaker's got to be, like fighting back throughout this whole thing. That's the role of the babyface in many ways. But again, like, you're not going to overshadow the Undertaker very easily, but you also have to carve out your own niche sort of thing. So you've got to be like on that level somewhat. So you've got to hold your own. You've kind of got to be 50-50 and somewhat, 60-40, somewhat, in terms of, yes, I might have, he might have scared me, or he might have, chokeslammed me here, but I RKO'd him there, or whatever else it was, and, then I beat him up or made him bloody or whatever it was, and things like that. I stole the urn, I stole something, important to him or to his legacy or whatever else, or I beat him up or whatever else it was, these sorts of things. So, not just like I had got into a fight with him. No, I left him beaten and bloody, like, or I, basically drowned him, or I, almost choked him to death, or something else, like, or I set him alight in a casket, or whatever it was. All these different ideas, like, you've got to be like, okay, he got me here, he got me there, or whatever it was, but I came back and I got him here, but then he got me back from that, so you're always saying, okay, we've got to keep this thing moving until the point at which, that is over. So you've got to keep that importance going into the next thing. or from the previous thing, saying, okay, cool, right, we did that stuff with Randy Orton, with The Undertaker, and for both of them, you've got to be like, okay, we've got to move on for both of you, and do something else and go in a new direction for both of you. You both have to have significant things to go on to next, because we want you both to be, able to help put other people over, not just get yourselves over, but help put other people over, because we have a full roster of people that, again, sometimes one set of people are the guys or gals that are getting over and getting, the opportunities at the top or whatever else it is. But other times it's like, oh, okay, now it's your turn, or now it's, whoever's turn, it's somebody else's turn, So although there are some people that are, more, I don't know, like at that point or in that conversation longer, like The Undertaker was there for 20 something odd years in that conversation of, he's always got something to do, and you could apply this to a few people or whatever, like Eddie Edwards. Okay, he had that, great feud with Sami Callihan. Then he had that whole thing with like Honor No More and whatnot. That was great. Then he had this thing with the System and whatnot. So you're keeping him, in some sort of story, yes, in some sort of faction or whatever, but he's always involved in a story to some extent. Maybe he's not always the main focus of those things. It's more moved to Moose being the main focus of the last few years. He's become the de facto leader, or the de facto face of that, and Eddie and Brian were more so the tag team guys or whatever. But he was still an very important cog in that wheel for a very long time, and still a very important member of the TNA roster, and has been for a long time. Same thing, look at Eric Young. He had Violent by Design, then he went off on his own, and then he got taken out by Cody Dean, and we thought that was going to be the end of him, but then he came back because stuff with WWE didn't work out or whatever it was. So then they had to reintroduce him, and then you had him take do that big babyface run, then take over the Northern Armory and whatnot. And now he's doing what he's doing now with the cleanse and whatnot that's coming and all that, so you're giving him and a lot of this stuff you can work with the talent with and say, okay, what do you think you should do? Well, I think I should do this and I should do that, obviously you take things with a grain of salt or whatever, because somebody might say, well, I think I should win the title or whatever, very much like Hulk Hogan-esque, where it's like, oh yes, I think I should be the main attraction forever and ever and ever, brother, and nothing else works for me, brother, so I don't care, brother. But obviously if somebody says I should be the attraction, yes, in a sense, but you shouldn't just be the attraction the whole fucking time. You have to be an attraction in another sense. You have to be here so that we can, utilize you to get other people over, but also keep you over to a certain extent so that you're important, and that when people do beat you, it actually means something, and that sort of thing. You can't just be like a guy on the roster that exists. You can't just be here and be like, yeah, I exist and maybe I get TV time here or there. Sometimes there's just not enough time in the week. I think from us talking about this several times, the 2 hour to maybe 2.5 hour or whatever shows are the perfect length of shows that people kind of want to. It depends. I think 3, as some people said, 3 hours is okay if there's actually a bunch of stuff going on in that 3 hours, like it's jam packed full of stuff, and it doesn't feel like 3 hours. It feels like, like 20 minutes or something. If there's always something to keep your eye and keep your attention and that sort of thing, it's like, oh yeah, cool, this is great, because like there's never really a down spell. Yes, maybe like there's this comedy match or there's this other thing going on, but everybody feels like they're important in some ways, even the comedy characters or even those other things that are going on. Like, you can make somebody feel important in many different ways by being not just a comedy character, I suppose, but by being that ultimate underdog babyface kind of thing, where it's like it's harder to be a comedy character when you're a heel. I think it's way harder, because then you just get clowned on. I think if you're like a comedy character, I think maybe R-Truth kind of pulled this off, but I think he was mostly actually really a babyface, really, anyway. But you can really easily pull off being a somewhat comedic babyface more easily, I think, rather than being like a heel. But yeah, like, again, having story and having TV time and having all like wins and losses. You can't just lose. You've got to win a few matches. You've got to, like, some people are just the hands that help, other people get over, or should be in some ways, because it's like, well, it's not your time anymore. And maybe it never was, unfortunately, but like, your job isn't, now isn't to get yourself over. It's to, like, this is that new generation. We've got to get these, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, maybe early 30-year-olds or whatever, over before they're in their mid-30s, because, like, by the time that they're in their mid-30s, if they're not already, like, world champion or main event level people, or even an attraction of some sort, it's like, well, like, you can look at the Rascals. They're not main event guys, but they are an attraction, and I think that they have been, a big attraction in TNA, and they have been tag team champions and have been very important. But you could elevate them still. I still feel like, as well, you could elevate any of the members of the Rascals as well. So, like, Trey's had a couple of runs with the X Division title. Wentz has had a run. Dez has had a run. So, yeah, like, all those guys have had a run with the title. So it's like, those guys feel like people that, especially when Trey had his, like, heel run, that was amazing. But, like, that guys that have had a story, have had, like, moments where it's like, are they going to be the next main eventer, or are they going to be in the mix, or whatever, like Ace Austin and guys like that, or whatever. I think the tag team of Chris Bay and Ace Austin was a great tag team. Like Danny Luna and Jody Threat, they were a great tag team in many ways, very well liked. Nothing can last forever, but like, they were good for the time that they were together, I think, still. And I still think, like, Luna's on a trajectory now, and I hope that keeps going. I think it doesn't just come down to how people are booked, but that's obviously a big thing that is very important, obviously. It's what you do with your minutes sometimes as well, like maximizing your minutes, not just in terms of, match, but in terms of promo. Not to say that you go into business for yourself, but the way you carry yourself and the way that you deliver these promos and things like that, or the way you deliver your matches, or the way you deliver these things, the intensity or the lack thereof, or the lack of effort, or whatever it is, really showcases, where you're at. Like, if you're just, this is one of those big things that if you phone it in, people know about it. So people don't, like, often don't gravitate to people that are just phoning it in. People will gravitate to the people that are out there trying their hardest and going not full throttle the whole freaking time, because that's freaking insane, but like they're always trying to do the best that they can with what they've got. And sometimes you're only as good as your dance partner, as I say. So if your dance partner is out there and is like, nah, I don't want to do nothing and whatever, and I want this match to be 5 minutes long, and I'll hit all my moves, and then it'll be over, and you won't hardly get any offense, and that's about it. Yeah, that'll be the match. Yeah, that, nothing else works for me, brother. You know, I can't be bothered. Um, you know, so that's where I think it's like, you know, there's wrestler accountability, like, and the same thing, like it like, not just saying, oh well, in the match or in the promo or whatever. If you're not out there on social media, or if you're not out there on these podcasts and whatnot, if you're not out there sprigging your merch or trying to get interviews or whatever, if you're not going to the gym, if you're not putting in the effort, all the time, and trying to get better and trying to work on your promos or whatever else it is, or trying to work on your in-ring ability or whatever, you're not going to go anywhere, because, like, unless you're great, unless you're friggin' awesome, you're not going to go anywhere. People are, like, you've got to be doing everything, and that's like the schedule. It's an insane schedule. You can't be like, yes, you want to sit back and take a few minutes off here or there. Obviously, you need some rest sometimes. Everyone needs to sleep. Everyone, like, when you do a good training session and you go, oh, that was a good training session, wasn't it? And then have a few minutes and have your hydration break or whatever, and things like that, or your protein shakes or whatever it is, and your cool down and your sauna, or your whatever it is that you do to help relax, your ice baths or whatever it is. You got to recover. You can't just go. You've got to, oh, my arm's hurting me, but like, that means I had a really good workout, so I better, really rest it so I can, go hard tomorrow, go hard, later on, whatever else it is. Yeah, and it's motivation, and just like, everyone's having a bad day sometimes, like, just mentally or just physically. Like, you get the flu, you get, a cold or whatever, that can mess with you, or you're just having one of those days where it's like, oh man, my dog died or whatever, or I'm just feeling blue today or whatever it is. Again, that can mess with you being in that position and taken, like, to that level, because if it, like, the booker might be like, you don't want to fucking, pull your finger out, do you? And you're like, yeah, I'm just not feeling it today. My dog died or whatever. Like, if they're understanding or whatever, and you say, hey, look, can you just give me a few days, or give me a week or something, or whatever. I'm just, my grandmother died and all this other stuff, whatever it is. Like, there's always something like this that happens. But this is the road. This is what happens. This is what you sign up for when you become a wrestler. You miss people's birthdays. You miss Christmases. You miss somebody's wedding. You miss somebody passing away. And all this other stuff. You just miss all these things sometimes because you're chasing your passion. Like, and sometimes if you say, no, I just need a week, or I just need a few days, or just something, whatever it is, and people are understanding of that, you better take it, and you better friggin' then come back and say, hey, all right, I had my time off or whatever. And it does suck sometimes to be like, oh man, I could only have a week or whatever it is to go and grieve or to go and get through all of this or whatever else it is. But that's the job. That's why you've got to fire yourself up with more passion and say, no, you know what? Grandma knew what I wanted to do when I was, 19 or whatever it was. And I told her I want to be a wrestler. And, she saw me wrestle, a few months ago or whatever it was. And now I'm even more motivated than ever to, to get to the top, to get to the next level, to get to the next stage and win the big one for grandma, whatever it is, you know what I mean? Like all that stuff. So you've got to use it as motivation sometimes to be like, oh yeah, maybe I was slacking a little bit before, but this time I'm going to be out there and, even if I'm not the most entertaining or the most interesting person, I'll try to get my face out there a lot more. And I'll be like, and that's why, like, sometimes, like, I say it's like, oh, the Hardys, they're, doing the fourth rope stuff. They're doing, I can't remember, some other couple other promotions and stuff. I'm like, dudes, what the heck are you guys doing? You're like, and they're doing like 3 or 4 hour fan meet and greets and signings and whatnot until like 3 or 4 a.m. or whatever the fuck it is. It's like, that is dedication. And that's where it's like, this is what you have to do. Even if you've only got 5 people or whatever it is, or a few people turning up to see you, it's like, dude, stay there, and show that you're dedicated. Even if people aren't coming, it's like, man, the Rascals were there all that time too. Like, only a handful of people went to see them and got to get signatures or whatever it was, but they were there for just as long as the Hardys. They were just as dedicated. Whatever it was. Like, here they are. Here's somebody, whatever it is, on the podcast here, on the podcast there. Like getting their face out there. Like Mike Santana and all of this. He's on all these podcasts and things like this. Even though it's like a lot of the same stuff, he's like, out. Same with Joe Hendry before. Like, he was out there. He was trying to, get himself, into those positions of like, no, I want to be talked about. I want people to come and get me for interviews, even if I have to do the same interview 500 times or whatever it is, because that's, how I'll get out there, how I'll get, more people to see what I'm doing and whatnot and all of that sort of stuff. And it's just positive things either way. So yeah, you've got to, it's give and take, you know what I mean? But it is one of those things, if the bookers are just like seeing you do all this stuff and they're not rewarding you, well, then it's like, well, you don't respect me, or you don't respect how much I put in. Or even if they're perhaps like ignorant, I don't know. But they're like, well, we don't think you put enough effort in and all this other stuff. And you say, dude, I did, 3 interviews with this. Oh, I did 3 interviews last night with these people. I did signings here for like 3 hours there. I did the gym there. I did this there. You could show them your schedule. Literally show them your schedule and say, look, this is everything that I'm doing. I'm wrestling here. I'm wrestling there. And that's maybe where you're like, well, maybe drop one of those and just wrestle for us, or wrestle a bit less, only wrestle for the big money a bit more, you're obviously working out for all of it, but it's like, if you're wrestling for less places, then you can fit more in for the more high paying gigs or whatever it is, like, so it's, if you're saying, oh man, why am I doing this, to get nowhere, where even if it's a high paying gig and they're like, we still don't think you're doing enough. Well, see you then. I'm just going to go to the other places and work harder there then. If somebody doesn't respect you or respect your efforts, that's another thing. But it's like, yeah, when somebody has that level of motivation, and that's like the relationship with the bookers or the talent relations, you've got to have that good relationship and be like, listening to them and being like, yes, I'm hearing what they're saying, putting it into and trying to put it into action. It's not just the hours that I spend in the gym or the hours that I spend doing signings and meet and greets and doing interviews and doing promotion and selling my merch and all this other stuff or whatever it is. It's trying to get those little subtle things into my promos, or those little subtle things into my matches, or those little subtle things into everything that I do, so that people are like, okay, this guy, he's a star, he could be a big star, and whatnot, and we really want to see him or her or whatever do well. Because again, those fans, like, if they're behind you as well, you've got to have the fans behind you, even if you're a heel. Like, if you're not entertaining as a heel and people don't react to you, then, like, what are you going to do? You're going to have to get over. You have to get over sometimes. And you have to kind of be like, right, what will get over? How can I get over? And, that's the thing. Sometimes that's not easy or fun or whatever, or whatnot. But yeah, like, that's how you've got to be able to be used in a high profile situation, because not everyone can, but this is how you take somebody or you utilize somebody in those high important positions. You've got to keep them doing things. They can't just like loaf around or whatever it is, or if they're off TV for a few weeks, you can't forget that they exist or whatever it is. You've got to be having little subtle references to them or mentioning them or whatever else it is. You can't just go with it. Like now, The Undertaker, people don't really mention The Undertaker very much. But like when he was like wrestling, he was still mentioned when he wasn't there. Like the mythical Undertaker, like you're trying to get that level of, don't forget, like he took out The Undertaker a few weeks ago, or whatever it was, and things like this. Maybe The Undertaker's going to come back at some point and he's going to seek his revenge on this person, or what, that sort of thing. You can't be like, oh yeah, we've forgotten about him or whatever it is. It's a nice surprise or whatever it is for when he does come back in some ways, but if people have kind of forgotten about you, it's like, oh, okay, well, that didn't work out because you're not teasing it enough, or you're not putting it in the minds of people enough to be like, oh, yeah, he could come back, or he could be, still lurking, or whatever else it is, or he's not disappeared and he still doesn't exist, or whatever the frick it is. He still exists, or whatever it is. So people are like, oh, The Undertaker, Randy Orton took him out. Oh, man, well, maybe he's going to come back soon. He didn't come back this week. Oh, wait, there's a fucking cross on the fucking, screen. Oh, shit, that's The Undertaker with The Undertaker's gong. Bong, bong, He's not here this week. But that was a big tease or whatever. He might be back soon or whatever. There was a big lightning bolt or something. Oh, man, that was The Undertaker, trying to strike down Randy Orton. Or what, like these little things. Obviously, those are very specific to The Undertaker or whatever else it is. But playing somebody's music or playing somebody's interest music or whatever is like, oh, yeah, whoa, look out. Are they coming down? Whatever, moments. And it might just be a tease, but it's like also like, oh, we can't forget that they're, this person took them out. So they're, trying to play mind games or whatever it is now with them. Am I coming? You don't know whether I'm coming or whether I'm not coming. I'm just making you sweat now, like type thing, And then the time that you think, yeah, he did this last week where he played his music. I'm not even paying attention. But then out of nowhere, here he is, choke slam or whatever, or whatnot, things like that or whatever it is. So, yeah, you've got to be able to be using these guys or using these elements to be like, okay, they're still involved, even though they're not here. We haven't forgotten about them. There's, like, we'll always talk about them and we'll always mention them and we'll always keep them in, in our forefront of their minds, because that's what we want for the fans. So they're not like, oh man, they've forgotten about this person, or whatever. But Anyway, guys, those are my thoughts on this one. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you join me again in another one.